The rain came earlier than usual that night. Thick, cold, and relentless. The kind of rain that made the earth shiver and the night feel endless. I remember standing by the kitchen window, one hand on my swollen belly, the other clutching the edge of the counter as thunder rolled across the sky. My husband, Daniel, sat in the living room, a half-empty glass of wine in his hand, his mother lounging beside him with a smug smile. I could hear their muffled laughter over the soft hum of the television. It was laughter that used to fill this house with warmth, but now it only carried poison. "Daniel," I called softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk?" He didn't even look up. "About what, Evelyn?" "About us. About what's been happening lately." His mother's smirk widened. "Oh, dear, not this again. Haven't you tired of nagging, Evelyn? You should be resting for that baby, if you even deserve it." My heart clenched. I swallowed the sting in my throat. "I just want peace, Mother Helen. For all of us." Helen laughed. "Peace? You bring storms wherever you go." That's when Daniel stood, his jaw tight, eyes cold. "Enough. You're stressing my mother and yourself. Go to your room." I hesitated, my pulse pounding. "Daniel, please." Now. Something inside me cracked, but I turned away quietly. It wasn't the first time he'd chosen her over me. It had been happening since the day she moved in, since the day my pregnancy test turned positive. I walked toward the hallway, feeling the ache in my lower back. But before I could reach the stairs, Helen's voice cut through the room again. "You know what your problem is, Evelyn? You think you can trap my son with this pregnancy, but you can't. You'll never truly belong here." I froze. My fingers dug into my palm. "You think I trapped him? He's my husband." Daniel's face twisted with frustration. "Don't talk to her like that. I'm not the one disrespecting." "Enough." He stormed toward the front door, yanked it open, and pointed outside into the rain. "If you can't respect my mother, you can leave. Cool off." At first, I thought he was bluffing. I waited for a hint of remorse, a flicker of hesitation, but there was none. Helen's eyes glistened with satisfaction. "Daniel," I whispered, feeling my throat close, "I'm pregnant. It's raining. You can't." He shoved the door wider. I sat out, and before I could move or speak again, his hand pressed against my shoulder, firm, final, and he pushed me over the threshold. The wind slapped my face. The door slammed shut behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, numb, the rain soaking my hair, my clothes, my trembling skin. I knocked softly at first, then harder. "Daniel, please. I'm bleeding, Daniel." Through the glass, I saw them, both of them, watching. Helen whispered something, and Daniel hesitated. Then, he turned off the light. Darkness swallowed me whole. I sank onto the porch, clutching my belly as pain coiled through me. The cold water pooled around my feet, and the rain blurred everything. The thunder muffled my sobs. Somewhere between the crying and the storm, I must have passed out. When I woke, the rain had slowed. The streetlights glowed faintly through the fog, and every part of me ached. My dress clung to my skin, and I could still feel the faint warmth of blood on my thighs. I whispered to my unborn child, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." But something changed in me that night. A switch flipped. The softness of my heart hardened into something unrecognizable. By the time I stood again, the world felt different, quieter, sharper, and by midnight, I was back on that same porch. Only this time, I wasn't alone. The clock struck midnight. The storm had softened into a whisper, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and regret. Inside the house, warm light spilled from the living room window, the same window they had stared through hours earlier as I begged for mercy. Now I stood before it again. Only this time, I wasn't shivering, I wasn't crying, and I wasn't alone. The porch creaked under my weight as I lifted my hand and knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Inside, I heard muffled voices, then footsteps. Helen's sharp tone carried through the wood. "Who in the world is knocking at this hour?" Daniel's voice followed, slurred from too much wine. Probably some stray asking for shelter. Ignore it. But I knocked again. Louder. Knock. 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 Something in that rhythm made Daniel pause. "Wait," he muttered. That sounded like... He didn't finish. I heard the click of the lock, the creak of the handle turning, and then the door opened just enough of the light to spill over my soaked figure. For a moment, silence. Then Daniel's face drained of color. He staggered back a step, eyes wide, mouth trembling. "Evelyn?" Helen appeared behind him, her smile fading the instant she saw me. Her fingers loosened around her wine glass. It slipped, shattered against the floor. "Wah! What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I stepped forward, water dripping from my hair, the porch light flickering behind me. My clothes clung to me, darkened by rain, and something else. "You locked me out," I said softly. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. Calm, empty. "You watched me while I begged." Daniel blinked rapidly, as if trying to wake from a nightmare. "Evelyn, listen, I didn't mean to." I cut him off, my gaze fixed on him. "You turned off the light while I was bleeding." "Daniel, you meant every second of it." Helen reached for his arm. "Daniel, close the door." "She's unstable. Look at her. She's gone mad." But Daniel couldn't move. His eyes were glued to the figure standing slightly behind me in the darkness of the porch. A faint whimper came from the shadows. Soft, almost like the sound of an infant breathing. Helen froze. "What is that?" I tilted my head slightly, and the corner of my lips curved. "I told you," I whispered. I wasn't alone. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the porch in a white flash. And for a brief second, they saw it. Something swaddled in my arms. Something impossibly still. Helen gasped and stumbled back, clutching the wall. No, that's not possible." Daniel's voice broke. "Evelyn, what is that?" I looked down at the small, wrapped bundle, and then back up at him. My eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something colder. "You didn't care when I was bleeding," I said. "But now you will see what you turned away." Daniel tried to reach for me, but I stepped backward. The baby's soft, fragile shape pressed against my chest. The night wind howled again, as though echoing the pain that had once lived inside me. "I came back," I whispered. "And so did he." Inside, the clock struck 12:20. The door remained open, rain misting the floor, and the wine glass fragments glittering like blood under the light. Helen whispered, "Daniel, close the door, now." But Daniel couldn't move. He was staring at me, at us, as if he finally understood what he'd done. And in that haunting, breathless silence, I smiled one last time and said, "Don't worry, we're home now." Then the lights flickered and went out. Morning came, but sunlight never touched that house. The clouds hung low and heavy, pressing against the windows as if the storm hadn't ended at all. The air smelled of damp wood and fear. Every corner seemed darker than it should have been. Helen hadn't slept. She sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her hair tangled and her face pale. Her fingers trembled around her teacup as she stared at the staircase. "I heard it again," she whispered. Daniel didn't answer. He sat opposite her, hunched over, staring at the floor. His eyes were red, his voice hollow. "You didn't hear anything," he muttered. Helen's tone sharpened. "Don't you dare gaslight me, Daniel. I heard it. A baby, crying near my door." Daniel looked up sharply. "Stop." But she didn't. "You think I'm imagining it? Go look in that nursery yourself. Go see what your wife brought back into this house." Daniel's hand twitched at the mention of my name. "She's not my wife anymore," he said quietly. "Not after last night." Helen snorted. "Good. That woman was a curse from the day you met her." But the words fell hollow, because even as she said them, a faint sound drifted through the hallway. The gentle creak of the rocking chair upstairs. Creak, creak, creak. Helen froze. Daniel's face went pale. He stood slowly, his throat tightening. "That chair, did you move it?" "I haven't gone upstairs since." Helen stopped mid-sentence, eyes darting toward the stairwell. "Daniel, don't." But Daniel was already climbing, each step groaning beneath his weight. The air grew colder the higher he went. At the top of the stairs, the door to the nursery stood slightly open. The faint lull of the rocking came from within, accompanied by something else, a soft whispering, a woman's voice, soothing, humming an old lullaby. He pushed the door open. The nursery was exactly as they'd left it. Pale blue walls, a white crib by the window, and the rocking chair swaying back and forth by itself. On the floor, water pooled beneath the window frame. Raindrops that had somehow found their way inside. The curtains fluttered even though the window was shut. Daniel's breath caught. "Evelyn." The rocking stopped. The room fell still. He took a hesitant step forward. "Evelyn, I just want to talk." No answer. Then from behind the crib came a whisper, so soft it could have been the wind. "Sure you'll wake him?" Daniel froze. The voice was unmistakable. My voice. He edged around the crib slowly, but there was nothing there, only a baby blanket folded neatly on the floor. Still damp, still stained with the faintest trace of red. He reached for it, his hands trembling. And then, the mobile above the crib began to spin on its own. Soft music tinkled through the silence. Daniel stumbled back, heart hammering. The lullaby was one he knew. The same song I used to hum every night before bed. The one I sang to our unborn child. He turned and fled down the stairs, his breathing ragged. Helen stood waiting at the bottom, clutching the wall. "What did you see?" she demanded. Daniel's voice cracked. "She's here, Mother. She's still here." Helen's face twisted. "Nonsense. She's just trying to scare us." "She's not trying," he said. "She is." That night, neither of them left their rooms. But the whispering didn't stop. It moved through the house, soft, almost gentle, like someone walking the halls, humming a lullaby for a child who wasn't there. And sometime after midnight, Helen's door creaked open on its own. She sat up, trembling, eyes wide. At the foot of her bed stood a woman, soaked, pale, eyes glistening in the dark. Cradled in her arms was a small bundle. Helen's lips quivered. "Evelyn, please." The woman smiled faintly. "Sure," she whispered. "You'll wake him." Then she vanished. Helen's scream shattered the night. By dawn, the house no longer felt like a home. It was breathing, alive in a way that no house should ever be. The walls groaned softly with the morning wind, and every sound seemed to come from somewhere unseen. Helen hadn't come out of her room since the scream. Daniel stood in the kitchen, staring into his coffee, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. His hands shook as he tried to steady the cup. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it, the soft hum of that lullaby seeping through the cracks of the walls. He whispered to himself, "It's not real. She's gone. She's gone." But deep down, he knew she wasn't. It started small that morning. A gentle tap, 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 coming from the nursery above him. He froze. The sound was steady, rhythmic, like small hands against the wall. Then, faintly, the hum returned. The same song I used to sing when we still loved each other, before his mother moved in, before his heart turned cold. Musical note, "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." Musical note. Daniel gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles whitening. He couldn't take it anymore. He ran upstairs, flung the nursery door open, and stopped dead. The crib was gone. Only the rocking chair remained, slowly swaying back and forth in the corner. Water stains marked the floorboard beneath it, and the faint scent of iron blood hung in the air. He turned in a slow circle, panic rising. "Where's the crib?" No answer. Then a whisper brushed against his ear. "You shouldn't have turned off the light, Daniel." He spun around. No one there. But when he looked toward the wall, his breath caught. Handprints, small, wet, crimson handprints, were appearing one by one on the pale wallpaper, dragging downward as if something was clawing its way out from behind it. He stumbled back, crashing into the rocking chair. It stopped moving instantly. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the wall breathed. A long, slow exhale, like something deep inside it was waking up. Daniel bolted from the room. Downstairs, Helen sat at the dining table, trembling, the morning light flickering through the curtains. She looked older, drained of color, her lips pale and cracked. When Daniel appeared, she nearly jumped. "Mother," he gasped. "Something's happening in that room. The walls." Helen cut him off sharply. "Don't speak of it. Don't give it power." "What do you mean, don't?" "I know what I saw," she hissed. "Last night, she was here. She spoke to me. And the thing in her arms, Daniel, it was dead." He stared at her, his mouth dry. "She's punishing us." Helen's eyes flashed. "No, she's haunting you. I warned you not to marry her. I told you that woman would bring ruin." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "You were the one who told me to lock her out." The words hung heavy between them. Helen froze. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Then knock, knock, knock. They both turned toward the front door. The same pattern. The same slow rhythm from that night. Helen's cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Daniel whispered, "No one's there." The knocks came again, louder. "Knock, knock, knock." Helen screamed, "Make it stop." But when Daniel stepped closer, the knocking stopped, and from the other side of the door came a voice, soft, trembling, heartbreakingly familiar. "Daniel, it's cold. Please let me in." He froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. It was my voice. Faint, wet, fragile. "Please, it's raining again." He turned to Helen, who was whispering a prayer under her breath, her eyes shut tight. Then the voice came again. "Daniel, don't ignore me this time." The lights flickered. Somewhere upstairs, the rocking chair began to move, and with it, the faint cry of a baby, echoing through the vents, coming from inside the walls. Helen's eyes snapped open, filled with horror. She whispered, "She's in the house?" The storm had ended, but the house hadn't noticed. Water still dripped somewhere unseen, and the smell of damp would have settled into the walls like a memory that refused to fade. Daniel hadn't opened a single curtain since the knocking. He moved through rooms like a shadow, sleepless, jumpy, every sound setting his teeth on edge. The silence was worse than the voices. It left too much room for guilt. Down the hall, Helen was pacing. Her rosary beads clicked between her fingers, but even her whispered prayers trembled. "You should have listened to me," she muttered again and again. "You should never have married that woman." Daniel finally snapped. "Stop saying her name like a curse, Mother. She's not the devil. You made her into one." The words hung in the air. Then came a faint, hollow creak beneath their feet. Both froze. Another creak. And another, like something shifting on the floorboards. Daniel crouched, pressing a hand to the old wooden planks. "It's just the pipes," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Helen's eyes darted toward the front porch. "No, that sound is coming from under there." He fetched a flashlight and stepped outside. The porch boards gleamed with leftover rain. The night smelled of wet soil and rusted nails. When he knelt to lift one of the loose planks, a wave of cold air escaped. As the earth itself exhaled, he shone the beam down into the narrow crawl space. Only mud, cobwebs, and something glinting faintly. He reached down and pulled it out, a small silver locket. He knew it immediately. My locket, the one he'd given me on our wedding day. Daniel's breath hitched. The hinge was rusted, but when he forced it open, the tiny photograph inside was still clear. Me smiling, one hand on my pregnant belly. He whispered, "I thought you lost this." A whisper drifted up from the crawl space, soft, almost kind. "You left it with me." He stumbled back, dropping the locket. The flashlight flickered, then died. The porch boards above him groaned, as though someone were walking right over his head. But he was the only one outside. He bolted back into the house, pale and shaking. There's something under the porch," he gasped. Helen stared at him, wide-eyed. "Then we leave. Tonight. We pack and go." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You can't run from guilt, Mother. Wherever we go, she'll follow, because she's not after revenge." He looked toward the nursery door, where faint light shimmered like moonlight through fog. "She wants us to remember." Helen's voice cracked. "Remember what?" He looked at her, really looked, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "The night you told me to let her scream." That night, Daniel dreamed of rain again. He stood on the porch, the same one that had soaked me to the bone. From beneath the boards came the sound of soft breathing, and then, faintly, a heartbeat. When he woke, he could still hear it. Not in the dream, in the house. Got it. Here's the next part. Keeping the gothic psychological tension, but without any graphic or supernatural gore. The night air was so still that every sound seemed to echo. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening. The ticking clock, the slow drip from the kitchen tap. And beneath it all, steady, faint, impossible, a heartbeat. He pressed a hand to mattress, thinking it might be his own pulse. But the rhythm came from below the floor. Thump, pause, thump, as though the house itself were breathing. He slid from bed and crept to the hallway. Helen's door was closed, a sliver of light showing beneath it. He could hear her whispering again, her nightly litany of guilt. "Forgive us! Forgive us! Forgive us!" Daniel descended the stairs barefoot. The boards were cool, damp with a film of dew from the open window. He followed the sound to the sitting room, the same place he'd last seen Evelyn alive. The heartbeat grew, louder near the rug by the fireplace. He knelt, pulling it back. The floor beneath was old pine, warped by years of weather. When he pressed his ear to it, the rhythm quickened. Thump, thump, thump. He whispered, "What do you want from me?" No answer. Only the faint smell of rain and lavender, her perfume. Then a voice, low and close. "Tell the truth." He jerked upright. The room was empty. But on the mantel sat the wedding photograph that Helen had hidden months ago. Evelyn in white, smiling, one hand on his shoulder. Now there was a hairline crack running through the glass, splitting their faces apart. At sunrise, he found Helen already dressed, a suitcase beside her chair. "I'm leaving," she said flatly. "There's something under that floor, and I will not stay to hear anymore." Daniel's voice was hoarse. "You can't run from the sound. You hear it too, don't you?" Her fingers trembled. "I hear nothing." But as she spoke, the faint rhythm pulsed through the boards again. Her eyes filled with tears. She clutched her chest as if the sound lived inside her. "It's your fault," she whispered. "You were supposed to open the door." Daniel turned toward the window. Outside, the porch shimmered with the morning dew, and for a moment he thought he saw a figure standing there. A woman in a pale dress, head bowed, watching. When he looked again, she was gone. Only the reflection of the rising sun remained. That afternoon, he fetched a crowbar from the shed. Helen begged him not to. "Some things are meant to stay buried," she said. He knelt by the fireplace, prying up the first plank. Dust rose, and the smell of damp soil filled the room. The heartbeat stopped. For a moment there was perfect silence, until something small and metallic rolled out from the gap and struck the floor with a clink. A key, old, rusted, engraved with a single initial, E. Daniel turned it over in his hand, his throat tightening. Behind him, Helen whispered, "It's the key to the nursery." He looked at her, and the weight of every choice he'd made settled in his chest. "She left it here for us to remember," he said. "She wants the door opened." That night, the heartbeat began again, louder than before. Absolutely. Here's where the story deepens into revelation and consequence rather than gore. By the next evening, the key seemed to have a pulse of its own. Wherever Daniel left it, on the mantel, in his pocket, on the table, he could hear it faintly tapping against the surface, keeping time with that slow, insistent heartbeat beneath the floor. Helen tried to ignore it. She busied herself with chores she didn't finish, moving from room to room like someone trying to outrun a shadow. But she never went near the staircase. That night, when the wind rose again, Daniel couldn't resist any longer. He climbed the stairs, each step a memory. The nursery door waited at the end of the hall, its white paint chipped and flaking. The air was colder there, as if the room had never quite recovered from that one terrible night. He held the key in his trembling hand. The metal was icy, but when it slid into the lock it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting. A soft click. The door eased open on its own. Moonlight spilled across the floorboards, silver and pale. The rocking chair stood still this time, a faint shimmer of dust swirling in the light. The crib was back where it had once been, though he could have sworn it was gone days ago. He stepped inside, whispering, "Evelyn?" No answer. Then, a faint rustle. The curtains moved, though there was no wind. A child's mobile, tiny stars and moons, began to sway gently above the crib. Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to choose between you and her." For a moment the silence thickened, and he almost believed the house was listening. Then the voice came, soft, close, almost in his ear. "You didn't have to choose. You only had to open the door." He turned sharply, but the room was empty. Still, the scent of rain filled the air, and the faint imprint of a woman's hand glimmered briefly on the crib's rail before fading. Downstairs, Helen heard him moving above her. She pressed her hands to her ears, whispering, "Don't listen, don't listen." But the lullaby drifted down anyway, his voice this time, broken and trembling. Musical note, "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Musical note. Helen's rosary slipped from her hands. She knew that song. Evelyn had sung it the night she died. When Daniel came down hours later, his eyes were distant. He held nothing in his hands, but the key was gone. Helen whispered, "Where is it?" He answered without looking at her, "I left it where it belonged." She frowned. "In the nursery?" He shook his head. "In the crib." That night the heartbeat on the floorboards finally stopped. But something else began, a faint rhythmic tapping, like tiny fingers on the window pane. Helen turned toward the sound, her pulse racing. Outside the glass, through the reflection of her own pale face, she thought she saw Evelyn standing in the garden, dry now, peaceful, one hand resting on her belly. And for the first time since that night, she wasn't angry. She just looked sad. The rain came back 3 nights later. Not the violent kind that slashed against the roof, but the slow, whispering rain that carried memory in its rhythm. Helen sat by the living room window, a shawl draped around her shoulders, staring out at the garden where she had seen her, Evelyn, standing just days ago. The glass fogged with her breath. Beyond it, the world blurred into gray. From upstairs came the faintest sound, a creak, slow and deliberate, like someone rocking gently in the nursery. Her fingers tightened around her teacup. "She's back," she murmured. And for once, the fear that had long bound her heart was gone. There was only guilt and the unbearable weight of memory. That night, Helen climbed the stairs alone, her candle flickering against the walls. The house had learned to hold its breath around her footsteps. When she reached the nursery, she didn't hesitate. The door opened at her touch. The rocking chair was moving again, not wildly, but in a slow, soothing rhythm. On it, there was no one, yet the shape of a handprint dented the armrest, as though someone had just risen. And beside the crib, a small puddle of water shimmered on the floorboards. Helen's voice trembled. "Evelyn, you can rest now. Please, you don't have to stay here." The air grew colder. Her candle guttered and went out. In the silence, a voice whispered, soft as a breeze through wet leaves, "Then tell him the truth." Helen's heart lurched. Truth. The voice came again, clearer now, a woman's and heartbreakingly familiar. Tell him what really happened that night. Downstairs, Daniel stirred from his restless sleep. He'd been dreaming again of Evelyn standing on the porch, clutching her belly, begging to be let in. But in this version, she wasn't angry. She was disappointed. He rose, went to the window, and froze. There, beneath the rain, a single figure stood motionless. The white dress clung to her like mist, and though her hair was soaked, her eyes were unmistakable. Evelyn. She looked up at him, and through the glass he heard her voice, not with his ears, but deep inside his chest. "Ask your mother." By morning, the rain had stopped. Helen was in the kitchen, silent, pale. She hadn't slept. Daniel entered, holding the window latch in his hand. It had snapped clean off during the night. "You saw her too," he said quietly. Helen didn't answer. He stepped closer. "She said I should ask you. What happened that night, Mother?" Helen's hand trembled as she set down her cup. For a moment, She looked like she might deny everything again, but then she met his eyes, and something broke inside her. "I didn't mean for it to happen that way," she whispered. "I thought she was lying. I thought the baby wasn't yours." Daniel's face went blank. "What did you do?" Helen's voice was barely a breath. "She begged me to let her in. She was bleeding. I told her she'd learn her lesson, that she should go back where she came from." The words hung between them like poison. Daniel stumbled back, shaking his head. "You locked her out?" "She was ruining you." Helen cried, her voice cracking. "I did it for you." The kitchen light flickered. Then, from the upstairs hall, came the sound of a door slamming, hard. Both froze. Daniel turned toward the noise, his voice breaking. "She's not gone, Mother. You kept her here." That night, Helen dreamed of rain again. But this time, she was the one outside, knocking, begging, while someone stood at the window, watching her through the glass. Morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, painting the kitchen in pale gold. But warmth had no place in that house anymore. The silence between Daniel and Helen was heavy, the kind that made every tick of the clock feel like an accusation. Helen sat at the table, her hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on a rain-streaked window. Daniel stood across from her, his face unreadable, voice low but steady. "Tell me everything, Mother." Her lips parted, trembling, and for the first time since that night, she didn't hide behind pride. 13 years earlier, the night Evelyn had been locked out was cold enough to bite. Helen remembered the sound of the rain hitting the porch, a desperate kind of rain, as though the sky itself was begging. Evelyn had come home early from the doctor, soaked to the bone. Her clothes clung to her, and there was blood on her hands. She said the doctor told her to rest. Helen whispered now, eyes glassy. Said she needed you, that the baby was coming early. Daniel's fists clenched. "And you thought she was lying?" Helen nodded slowly. "I convinced myself she was after your money. I thought she'd made up the pregnancy complications just to make you pity her." Her voice cracked. "I told her she was weak, that no woman of strength would use tears to win her husband. She was 6 months pregnant." Daniel's voice echoed through the kitchen. Helen flinched but continued. She tried to come inside. I told her she wanted to stay in this family. She had to prove she wasn't lying, that she could stand on her own 2 feet. Tears streamed down her cheeks now. "I locked the door, Daniel. I turned off the light, but I didn't know." He slammed his hand on the table. "Didn't know what? That she'd collapse on the porch? That she'd bleed to death in the rain while you watched?" Helen's sobs came in waves. "I thought she'd go to her mother's. I thought she'd leave and never come back." Daniel's chest heaved. He turned away, hands gripping the counter, knuckles white. Outside, thunder rolled. Then, 3 slow knocks at the door. Helen froze. "Daniel." He turned slowly toward the sound. His voice was hoarse. "Did you lock the front door?" Her eyes widened. "Yes, hours ago." The knocks came again, firmer this time. Then a voice. Soft, gentle, familiar. "Daniel, please, open the door." His breath caught. It wasn't angry. It wasn't haunting. It was Evelyn. Helen began to shake. "She's gone, Daniel. Don't." But Daniel was already moving. He reached the door and placed his hand against it. The wood was damp, cold. He could hear the rain whispering outside. "Evelyn," he breathed. Silence. Then, another voice joined hers. Smaller, fragile, a child's. "Daddy." Helen collapsed to her knees. "Oh, God! Oh, God!" Daniel turned the handle. The door creaked open. No one stood there, only the porch, glistening with rain. But the air carried the scent of lilies, Evelyn's favorite. And on the threshold, a small, wet footprint appeared. Then another, leading inside. Helen screamed, "Close it!" But Daniel didn't. He fell to his knees, sobbing, whispering, "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm so sorry." The wind swept through the hall, carrying with it the faintest sound, a woman humming in the soft cool of a baby. Helen covered her ears, rocking back and forth. But when she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the kitchen anymore. She was standing on the porch, Outside, in the rain. The rain was softer now, but it never stopped. It felt like time itself, slow, steady, unrelenting. Helen blinked, disoriented. One moment she had been inside the kitchen. Now, she stood barefoot on the front porch, her nightgown clinging to her like a second skin. The world around her shimmered with that strange, gray light that sits between dream and waking. Behind her, the house was silent. Before her, the rain whispered secrets only she could hear. Evelyn. Her voice trembled as she stepped forward. The wind answered first, carrying the scent of lilies again. Then, from the far end of the porch, a soft voice said, "It's cold, isn't it?" Helen turned sharply. Evelyn stood by the railing. Her dress dried despite the rain, her hair flowing gently in an invisible breeze. Her eyes were no longer angry, but infinitely sad, and in her arms she held a baby wrapped in white. Helen pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Oh, God!" Evelyn smiled faintly. "That night, I thought you'd change your mind. I kept knocking, begging. I told myself a mother couldn't turn another mother away." Tears blurred Helen's vision. "I was wrong. I was cruel." "Yes," Evelyn said simply. "You were." Her tone wasn't hateful. It was calm, the kind of calm that only comes from pain that's already burned itself out. Helen sank to her knees on the wet boards. "I've prayed every night for forgiveness, for a sign, for a chance to tell you." Evelyn stepped closer. The rain passed through her like mist. "You don't need to tell me," she said. "You need to tell him." Helen's eyes lifted, confused. "Daniel?" Evelyn nodded. "He still carries the blame. He thinks he should have been there. You kept the truth from him, and from me. The night you locked me out, he wasn't away at work, was he?" Helen froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Evelyn's expression hardened just slightly. "You told him the store called him in. You sent him away." Helen's tears mixed with the rain. "I wanted to talk to you alone. I thought if I could make you admit it, that the baby wasn't his." Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper that cut sharper than thunder. The baby was his. Lightning flared across the sky, illuminating them both. Helen fell forward, sobbing. I know that now. I killed you both for nothing." Evelyn knelt in front of her, placing a translucent hand over Helen's heart. "No, Helen, you killed the love that was meant to save you." The baby stirred in Evelyn's arms, cooing softly. When Helen looked up again, Evelyn was fading into the rain. "Wait," she cried. "Please, what do you want from me?" Evelyn's voice echoed faintly, carried by the wind. "The door must be opened by you." Helen gasped and looked back at the house. The front door, the same one she had locked 13 years ago, now stood closed. Inside, through the glass, she saw Daniel standing there, watching her just as she once had watched Evelyn. Only this time, she was the one in the rain. She ran to the door, pounding on it. "Daniel, please, let me in." But he didn't move. His eyes were wide with confusion. He could see her, but her voice came faint, muffled, as if through water. Helen screamed again. "I'm sorry. Please, open the door." Then, slowly, the latch turned. As the door creaked open, the rain stopped. Helen stumbled inside, collapsing against Daniel's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. He held her, hesitant at first, then tighter. "What happened? You were gone." She looked up at him, eyes hollow but clear. "She was here, Daniel, Evelyn, and she forgave me." Daniel's expression softened. "Forgave you?" Helen nodded, but she said, "The door must be opened." A sound rose from upstairs, soft, steady, rhythmic. The lullaby. Musical note. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." Musical note. Helen's eyes widened. "It's coming from the nursery." Daniel took her hand. Together, they climbed the stairs. At the top, the nursery door stood open, light spilling from within. Inside, the crib rocked gently on its own. And there, lying in it, was the old silver key. The key to the past. The key that started everything. Helen stepped forward and picked it up. The moment she did, The lullaby stopped. The house was utterly still. The storm had stopped hours ago, but its memory clung to the walls, that faint scent of wet earth and lilies, that quiet pressure in the air before something sacred happens. Helen stood in the nursery, the silver key trembling in her hand. Daniel stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the crib where it had been waiting, as though laid out by invisible hands. Neither spoke. They both knew what Evelyn had said. The door must be opened. But which door? Helen turned the key over slowly in her palm. It wasn't just metal. It pulsed faintly, almost alive, as though it carried a heartbeat that had haunted the house all these years. "She's not asking us to open this nursery door," Helen said softly. Daniel frowned. "Then what?" Helen looked at the floorboards, at the small uneven line where the wood had warped from old water damage, right below the crib. "The door under the house," she whispered. "The cellar." They hadn't opened that cellar in 13 years. It was where Daniel stored old tools, boxes, forgotten memories, and where the rainwater from that night had first seeped through. Now, as they descended the narrow steps, the air grew colder, heavier. Daniel held a lantern ahead of them, its glow catching on cobwebs and dust. "This place feels wrong," he muttered. Helen gripped the rail. "No, it feels unfinished." At the bottom of the stairs was a small wooden hatch, swollen and discolored. A rusted lock held it shut. Helen lifted the key. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she whispered for Evelyn and slid it into place. The lock turned without resistance. The hatch creaked open, and a rush of cold air swept through, carrying the unmistakable scent of rain. Inside was not darkness, but a faint shimmer of light. They stepped closer. Beneath the house lay a shallow hollow, and within it, something glimmered faintly, a locket. Helen knelt, her breath catching. She brushed off the dirt. Inside the locket was a tiny photograph, Evelyn and Daniel, smiling. On the other side, a small, delicate curl of hair. Helen's tears fell silently onto the soil. "She kept it," she whispered. "Even when she knew I hated her, she kept this." Daniel's voice was low. "This is what she wanted us to find." Then came the sound, gentle, echoing, like rain against glass. But it didn't rain this time. It was footsteps. Helen froze. Daniel turned toward the stairs. From above, through the cracks in the wooden ceiling, soft light began to filter, a silvery, pulsing glow. And then a voice, calm, almost tender. "You've opened the door." Evelyn's voice. The light descended slowly, filling the cellar. Her shape appeared, not ghostly now, but whole. The pain and blood were gone. Her eyes shone with warmth that no human forgiveness could match. Daniel took a step forward, tears in his eyes. "Evelyn," she smiled faintly. "You found it." Helen bowed her head. "I'm sorry. I can't undo what I did." Evelyn's voice softened. "No, Helen, but you finally opened what you locked. Not just the door, but your heart." The baby in her arms stirred again, cooing softly. Evelyn looked at Daniel. "He knows you now." Daniel's breath caught. "Our son." Evelyn nodded. "He was never lost, only waiting." As the light grew brighter, the cellar seemed to breathe, walls widening, shadows retreating. The locket in Helen's hand glowed faintly, then crumbled into dust that shimmered and rose into the air. Evelyn looked between them, one last, peaceful glance. "Let the rain fall, Daniel. Let it wash this house clean." Then she turned toward the stairway, her figure dissolving into light, carrying the faint laughter of a child that faded gently into silence. When it was over, Helen and Daniel stood alone. The air was lighter, the first warmth they'd felt in years. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft and steady, no longer angry, but cleansing. Daniel reached for Helen's hand. "We'll rebuild," he said quietly. "Not just the house, everything." Helen nodded through tears. "We'll leave the door open this time. Get ready." This is part 13, the conclusion to Locked Out in the Rain. The house had never been so quiet. For the first time in 13 years, the air didn't feel heavy. No whisper beneath the floorboards. No heartbeat in the walls. Only the gentle rhythm of rain, soft against the windows. Steady, calm, alive. Helen stood in the nursery doorway, the morning light washing over her. The room felt different now. Not haunted, just still. The crib was empty, but the faint scent of lilies lingered, sweet and peaceful. Daniel entered behind her, his eyes gentle but distant. He'd barely spoken since the night before. Some things words couldn't touch. They spent that day in quiet work, packing, dusting, restoring. The house creaked and sighed as if it, too, were releasing what it had held for too long. Helen found old photographs in the attic, Daniel and Evelyn at their wedding, her own handwriting on the back. For my son and his wife, may this be the beginning of everything. She traced the faded ink with her thumb and smiled sadly. I meant it once, she whispered. Daniel appeared in the doorway. Maybe you can mean it again. That evening, the rain began to fade, a slow, graceful ending, like a curtain falling after a long, tragic play. Helen and Daniel sat on the front porch together, the same porch where it had all begun. The boards had been replaced, but the memory lingered in the way the wind moved, the faint shimmer of water beneath their feet. For a long while, they said nothing. Then Daniel broke the silence. Do you think she's at peace now? Helen's gaze softened. She forgave us, Daniel. She came back not to haunt us, but to free us. He nodded. Then maybe it's time we forgive ourselves, too. A hush fell over the world as the rain finally stopped. The air was clear, washed clean. The moonlight spilled across the porch, bright and silver. From somewhere deep inside the house came the faintest sound, a lullaby, barely a whisper. Musical note, hush, little baby, don't say a word. Musical note. Helen smiled through tears. Do you hear that? Daniel's eyes lifted to the open sky. I do, he said softly. But this time it doesn't hurt. When they rose to go inside, Helen paused at the door. She placed her hand on the frame, the door that had once been locked against Mercy, and whispered, "Stay open." Then she left it ajar, just enough for the night breeze to slip through. Inside, the house felt lighter, brighter. The walls, once burdened with silence, now seemed to breathe with quiet life. Years later, people in town would pass by the old house and say it looked different now, as if the very would have forgiven itself. Sometimes on rainy nights, neighbors would swear they heard soft humming from the porch, a woman's voice, gentle and full of love. But when they looked, they'd see only the porch light burning steady through the mist, and a pair of rocking chairs swaying side by side. Helen lived long enough to see the garden bloom again, lilies, just like Evelyn's. Daniel planted them every spring. And when Helen's time came, it rained that night too. But no one cried about it. They said it was the rain's way of saying thank you. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't thunder, it whispers. And sometimes peace doesn't come when the rain begins. It comes when the rain finally stops.